So here's the mustard blooming. You can see the bees are on it. There's a field out in the distance where it was peanuts. They've pulled up recently. There's a little bit look coming up out there, but it's mostly still very young. But this is definitely in full bloom. It's pretty nippy this morning, but I can see many honeybees all over it. They got pollen on their legs, so it's still producing. I think the cold weather, I was told, kind of helps the mustard produce a little better, and these cold snaps may help. And we've had some rainy days too. So I'm hoping this field will just continue to grow. And way out there in the distance was also peanuts. It's coming out, but it's not really in full bloom yet, but the bees are working it. And I'm going to go check on the hives that I set over here in this mustard field. They're very small and there's a lot of foundation in them, but I want to see if I'm seeing any kind of increase in growth, and that'll tell me if I should start moving more colonies in, or if I just need to wait a little bit longer. And I'm going to find that out here in just a minute. But I am very happy to see this blooming so far. These hives here behind me are a lot of the smaller colonies that I've moved to mustard. They're set next to the mustard field that's just right on the other side of those trees there. And I mean, they're definitely working it, so that's a plus. I don't expect a lot out of this yard here because these colonies were pretty weak. They weren't going to make grade. That's why I moved them. I did give them a little bit of a thinner syrup a few weeks ago when I was here. It wasn't a true 1-to-1. I think it was like 1.5 parts sugar to 1 part water. And so hopefully they took it a little bit better. But what I'm going to do is get a quick grade here, see if I've seen any kind of increase, because most of these colonies were like 3, 4, 5 framers, maybe 6s, nothing impressive. And a lot of them have a lot of foundation. These were like late summer, late fall splits. So probably what I'm going to do is I'll top all the buckets off with a 1-to-1 syrup. I'm suspecting I'm going to have to rotate those boxes, put the brood box up top, put probably what's a box of foundation there underneath, and just see if this mustard's making any kind of increase on these smaller colonies. If it looks really good, I'll start moving maybe some more of my medium-sized colonies in. But I wanted to give these really small, weak colonies a chance to kind of have their fill of the mustard, and before I started bringing in more bees and more hives for competition. So I'll kind of see how they are going to do today. I don't really expect anything impressive from them, but hopefully they'll surprise me, and we'll see what's going to happen. So that's the first hive I opened here. It's pretty cold. It's about 52 degrees out here, and there is a little bit of a wind chill. We had a mild freeze last night. The weather can't make up its mind if it wants to be in the 70s or the 50s, but that's kind of how it usually is here in December. But they've got a good solid 5-frame population down here on the bottom, and they have drawn some of those frames of foundation out. But you know, I mean, if I'm generous, I might call it a 6-frame population. So I still wouldn't mark it as a maybe, because it's still got so much foundation. They have completely filled up the bottom box. It's all 10 frames of comb, and it's completely honey bound. I didn't pull any brood. I don't know how much they have. I'm kind of waiting for it to warm up a little more before I start pulling that brood out there. I don't want it to get chilled. And this one's taken about half a gallon. I did check a few other buckets when I got to the yard, and some of them have taken around half a gallon to a gallon of syrup. And I gave them that probably 1.5 parts sugar to 1 part water 2 weeks ago. So they are pulling it down. Like in this case, I probably wouldn't rotate the box because they are up there and they have drawn some of that foundation. These were splits that I made at the very end of September. I think it was almost October. So they've grown a hair. They haven't grown a lot. I definitely think feeding them the thick syrup was bad, because clearly that bottom box is just completely honey bound. And here, even though they're producing frames, they just have so much foundation. They don't have a lot of room to expand. So I'm going to, hopefully this 1-to-1 feed I'll give them will perk them up a bit. And I'll check the brood once it warms up a little later today. I want to see how many frames of brood are in there, and see if that mustard's sort of increasing the egg laying capacity of the queen or not. The majority so far, I'm still pretty early in the grading, are about a 5-frame population. Definitely seeing the bottom deep box there to be pretty honey bound. If I had some empty comb, I would just pull out those frames of honey and drop them in there in the brood nest for the queen to lay, but I just don't have any extra comb. And there's still so much foundation scattered around that I do want to give them this 1-to-1 to see if they'll draw it. but I'm a little torn about feeding them when they're partially honey bound but still partially foundation bound. They could reduce the brood nest even further and shrink the hive if I feed them. Or if it's warm and the bees are enticed to do it, they might draw that foundation, which would help the hive. So that could go either way. I have no idea what would happen, but I'm going to go ahead and feed them because I certainly have the food. And I just really want to see what this 1-to-1 is going to do. But this one's very much a solid 6 frame from the bottom. And because it's cold and windy, they're clustered more together. So that's already a 6. So that to me is one of the ones I'm going to mark as a maybe. And then, I've got at least a good couple of frame or two up here. Because remember, I count 2 mediums as 1 deep frame. So I'm seeing at least a good 4 frames of bees up there. So this one, yeah, I mean, I could probably generously call it an 8, but because of the foundation and because of the honey, them being honey bound, I'm going to mark this one as a maybe. There are a few like this, and you can tell because these stronger colonies have taken at least a gallon of that 1.5 to 1 parts sugar that I fed them, sugar water, 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I'm definitely feeling good about the thinner syrup. I'm hoping the 1-to-1 will do better too. And I noticed that yesterday I was grading a couple yards, and 1 yard was really bad 3 weeks ago. And I gave them a 1.5 to 1 parts sugar water feed 3 weeks ago. And surprise, surprise, they were able to take down that syrup compared to the heavy stuff I was giving them. And go figure, the hives grew quite a bit. The yard jumped up a lot. I maybe had, I don't even know, 10% of the yard or something graded out 3 weeks ago, and now close to 100% graded out just from taking that bucket. And there's a lot of yellow pollen coming in there too. So yeah, I mean, them pulling that feed down definitely is having a substantial impact. I just hope I can get these small yards like this to go, because the yards that look like this are the ones that I'm going to have to decide if I'll be able to put together that second semi or not. But we'll see. All right, so these September splits here, they're kind of okay. There was one I had to break down to a single. There were a few that I had to rotate, like here. I rotated the brood boxes on. They're mostly still around a 5 frame nuke. They are up in the medium boxes, which is nice, but they're not doing a whole lot. And they pulled down some of the thinner feed, and it seems to have helped them, but nothing really substantially impressive about them. And I moved these in at the end of September when the mustard was just starting to bloom. So the mustard has not performed any miracles for me, unfortunately, but they are hauling it in. I can see them, and there's plenty of yellow mustard pollen in the colonies. But yeah, them being honey bound and foundation bound and the thick feed probably is the reason, but I don't know. I'm gonna try to rectify it the best I can. There were a few colonies that are kind of going to go maybe, like there's a 6-7 frames with some of these. There was maybe one I saw that was a good 8 frame, but not really too impressed. What I was kind of happy to see is these 2 rows here. This was my one of my bee yards. I think I filmed the video that night where the moving hives, the mustard, the one where I ran over a pallet. It was one of these pallets over here. I got crushed with the bobcat. It actually is fine. All the queens took, just had no problems. I had to replace a couple boxes, but and 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 frames, but generally they were fine. They came out okay. But if you remember, if you saw that video, I went through that whole yard and there was like no brood, no eggs, no larvae. So I kind of freaked out and I moved them over here to mustard. I'm happy to say the queens have resumed laying. There are quite a number of eggs. There are some older larvae too. There appears to be little to no cav brood at all. And that was about 3 weeks ago, I believe. So I would have expected to see a lot more cav brood if they had started laying as soon as they got here. But it almost kind of seems, based off the brood patterns, that the queens, maybe the bees took about a week to settle in, maybe to bring that pollen in, and they felt confident enough to start laying. And of course, it's very stressful for them to be moved and they're in a new location. There's a ton of hives here. That probably also just stopped the queen from resuming laying right away. But thankfully, I do see pretty overall 2 good frames of brood. Some of the colonies have gone up, I would say maybe a frame of population, nothing significant. That's probably the few hives that where the queens just started laying when I brought them in, but the bulk of them just seemed like it took them a week to get laying. So that makes me feel better to think that it was a pollen issue that I had over there and it wasn't a queen issue. The other cool thing is if you remember, I started requeening a lot of that yard. Not a lot. I think I requeened like 4 hives or something. And because I thought the queens were bad, right? There's no eggs. I was like, oh, the queens are just, they're just bad. So let me pinch them. And, I just pinched the queen. I threw her body in like I was showing in the last video, and I stuck the cage right in the brood nest. And I moved those hives that same night, which would have been very stressful for the bees. Usually if the bees are under a tremendous amount of stress, that's going to create queen failure. So, it's going to lower your acceptance of new queens. Thankfully, all 4 of the queens were accepted, so that method seemed to be just fine. Now, there is one hive somewhere over here that they're creating supersedure cells, which isn't great, but and she seemed to be laying just fine as well. But it did seem that worked as far as pinching the queen and sticking the cages in the brood nest. And I had a couple yards I did earlier this week. One yard, I requeened 4 queens with that method, and only 1 out of 4 took. So I was kind of upset, and I was like, I messed up. This method isn't good. And then I did a yard that was maybe 2 miles down the road, same type of bees, nothing different about it whatsoever. Requeened 5 queens, and all 5 of them took. So that's pretty good. So I'd say, what is that, like 10 out of 13 or something? The queens were successful. And so it seems that method, it was pretty effective. It's definitely easier for me to not have to run out here and reinstall the queens the next day. But I'll still do some more colonies and come back and check and update, see how that requeening method's working. It could be a fluke either way, but I don't know. So I don't know how I feel about this yard. I've still got to get through all this hives over here. But so far, it does appear the mustard has stimulated at least about 2 frames of laying in the last 3 weeks for these colonies that got moved. The nukes don't really appear to have changed very much. I don't know. Overall, I'm not going to really feel very hopeful about this yard. There are a few that will go, but I think either A, that mustard has got to really just perform, maybe if the weather warms up and they can pull down this thin feed. Otherwise, the only way I can really see these probably going is if I bring in a load. Maybe I can bring in a load and send them out here or something of really strong colonies. I've got a few yards that have like 15, 20 frame population hives. I could probably pull a frame of cat brood from a lot of those colonies, or 2 with the bees on them, and drop them into these colonies that are, in that 5, 6, 7 range, and that might boost them up. That's an option. I'm not quite ready to make that call just yet because I still want to go through and grade and check out what, how many of the 6 and 7 frame hives I'm going to have, and just see, is it even going to be worth the effort? Maybe I just send 1 load and that's it, which will be okay. I just don't know yet. It's just hopefully, if all goes well, I should be done grading by the end of the month, is the goal. And then I'll know the exact number of 8 frame colonies I have and above. And then I'll know how many 6 and 7 frames. And the 6 and 7 frames are the ones that, to me, have a realistic chance of going. Anything that's 5 frame or below at this point, without me dumping a lot of brood and bees into it, I just don't see happening. And if we get too much cold weather, even these 6, 7 frames are going to go. They'll decrease by 1 or 2 frames of bees, which is exactly what they did last January. So we're going to have to see, but I still got a lot of grading to do, and we'll just see how it turns out. All right, managed to run through all these colonies. They're pretty much what I showed you guys. The average population here is probably like a nice 5 framer. They're not doing much. I had to actually rotate most of the boxes around here. I had to break a few down to singles. I did top all the buckets off, even though they were mostly full with the thinner 1-to-1 syrup. So I'm hoping that'll help them take it. They are taking it, but not quite at the pace I would like. They're definitely bringing in plenty of that yellow mustard pollen, but it seems to be the only type of pollen coming in here. When you pull the brood frames out, there's just yellow pollen. And take my opinion here with a grain of salt, because I could be wrong, and I hope I'm going to be wrong. But, this is only our 2nd year moving hives to mustard. This is the 1st year I've moved them so early. And, What I'm kind of noticing is that it's no better nor any worse than any other type of natural pollen that's coming into my area. The hives are holding down a couple frames of brood, and that is definitely a perk of bringing in the hives to mustard this time of year, is if you have a location that is shutting down, like the one I filmed the other night, and there was one back there too. I moved just the other night here. They will resume laying, even though it appears to take them about a week. And since you're looking at 3 weeks for that brood to hatch, you're looking at a total of 4 weeks before you begin to see a population increase. And that gets a little nerve-wracking, when the bees could be shipping in the next month or two. Still not sure yet when. That's not a huge boost, and it's not very fast. So I'm kind of torn. I'm kind of having to face the challenge of, do I want to move my stronger colonies in the other outside yards and start bringing them into mustard, even if they're doing well in their original yards, just to kind of guarantee that they'll continue to bring pollen in and those queens won't shut down. The problem is the bees aren't really growing that quick here either. The mustard's not supercharging them. It's nothing special, even though the field's right next door and there's more and more mustard blooming every single day, and the bees seem to have ample pollen in the hives. It's probably just the cold weather. They just can't expand very much. So do I want to bring more colonies and stronger colonies and sort of take food out of the mouths of these smaller colonies that I want to, that I really want them to grow? And I do have some other mustard locations, but I have hives out there too. So I'm kind of leaning towards just leaving the strong colonies where they're at in their parent colony yards, because they are growing, they're bringing in pollen. But what that means is I just have to keep running around and checking the brood nest in a lot of these yards very quickly to make sure they're not fully shut down. And they don't have to be so extreme. Like that yard I moved the other night that had like zilch brood in there. That was a very extreme scenario. There was another yard I moved just a few nights ago. I saw when I was working the bee yard, there was no pollen coming in. And then when I started to look at the brood frames and I slowed down a little bit, I did see they were beginning to crate. The brood was getting very spotty. There was a lot less egg laying, even though they had plenty of cat brood and some older larvae. So I think I got them over here, and they're resuming laying now, it seems like. I caught them before they completely shut down the brood. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but I definitely going to have to just keep an eye on the brood to make sure. Because I just don't see bringing them here to really have any benefit, as long as they're bringing in natural pollen elsewhere, regardless of what type of pollen. And I have some bee yards that are bringing in multiple types of pollen. See all kinds of different colors, and those hives seem to be doing a lot better than a yard like this that's bringing in a monopollen. It seems to me the mustard is just sort of a guaranteed pollen source, and it will produce well into spring. So it seems like I can hold down at least a couple frames of brood, and it's certainly much cheaper and easier to set them out here than buying a pollen sub. And just for some people ask me why I'm not using pollen patties, is because they won't touch it. If they have a natural pollen source coming on here like the mustard is, because it comes in pretty heavy, they won't touch those patties. I'll throw them out, and here in the southeast, we just have nothing but beetle problems. You'll have larvae. It's less likely this time of year, but you're still going to have issues. And the dry pollen sub, personally, I've used in the past and never did anything. The bees will eat it, but I think they just get carbohydrates. I never saw them store it. I never saw any brood production whatsoever. And even the pollen patties are kind of iffy to create any kind of brood production. I find the pollen supplementation for the artificial pollen is only useful if there's zero natural pollen coming in, and I have plenty of pollen coming in here, so it just doesn't benefit me. But my projection for this yard is that they're not going to California. That's what I think. There will be a few that'll make it, but nothing substantial. I think these colonies are going to be really nice in spring. I think I'll move them to tie. I think I'll pull some nice 5-frame nukes. I'll shake some bees to fill my minis up so we can start queen production, but I don't think they're going to make it. I had another beekeeper tell me yesterday that if I keep feeding them this 1-to-1 syrup and they're on mustard, these little 5-6 framers are going to turn into an 8 or a 10 come California. But I tell you, I don't see it, and I hope I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't have experience with having them here this early, and I don't have experience with giving them a 1-to-1 until just now. So I hope I'm dead wrong. But there's really objectively nothing else I can do to help this yard whatsoever. Best I can do is if I have some dead outs in other yards, I can bring the comb and replace some of this foundation, or maybe pull out some of these plugged out honeybound hives, or I can bring in a lot of strong colonies here and move the brood over, but I'm not ready to do that yet. So I don't feel very good about this location, which not that I expected them to. It's not really going to hurt my numbers, but When I saw the mustard blooming, you know, months ago, I really thought I kind of struck gold. And honestly, they're just kind of hanging in there. I think they're going to overwinter as a good 6 frame colony with a couple frames of brood, and they'll be great for next year. But I do not see them going to California. But I hope I'm wrong. We will see, and I'll update you guys if there's any change. I hope there's a change because there's a lot of money sitting here in pollination hives. So we'll see. Anyways, running out of daylight. I will catch you guys next week. Thanks.